about it. But it's also an incredibly flawed structure. For example, we have things like a blind spot on the side of our eye. There is an entire part of our visual field that we don't see, that our brain literally has to make up, essentially. And the reason for that is because the blood vessels that connect, that sort of feed the interior of the eye, they connect actually in front of part of the retina. They are touched in front of the retina, which means that it obscures part of the retina from receiving light and therefore receiving information. Now, why is that a bad idea? Well, because it can be done better, and we know that because there are animals, for example, squids and octopuses and things of that sort, that they have an eye very similar to the human eye, very similar to the vertebrate eye in structure, except that the attachment of the blood vessels and the attachment of the nerves is behind the retina, not in front of it, so they don't have a blind spot. Now, the conclusions are either that the human eye is, in fact, the result of an historical process of natural evolution, and therefore it's not perfect, it just works well enough, and it has survived, or that God really prefers squids.
I know I do.
I love them, especially sauteed, yeah.
Yes, the three of us with our eyeglasses definitely have intelligently designed eyes.
Oh, yeah.
Can I move on, or you want to say
Absolutely.
anything? Okay, let's talk about social Darwinism, because opponents of Darwinism like to bring up the idea of social Darwinism to attack Darwinism. Is social Darwinism Darwinism?
No, social Darwinism, which is a sort of a way of thinking that was proposed originally by Herbert Spencer in Darwin's time, is a social application of some of the ideas of Darwinism. Now, the fundamental idea of Darwinism is that living organisms undergo this struggle for survival and reproduction. Okay? The two things that matter in life for most living beings are to survive to the point in which you can have sex, and then to have sex successfully. As Richard Dawkins said once, as disgusting or strange as the thought may be, every single one of your ancestors had successful sex at least once, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. Now, that being the case, a social Darwinist would use the same sort of metaphor, would use the metaphor of struggle for survival and transport it into the context of a human society, which can easily lead to justify things like discrimination or racism, even slavery if you want, and certainly rampant capitalism, unbridled capitalism, because the idea is, well, I'm the stronger, I'm the one that's going to survive, and you have no right to complain about your rights being trampled and so on and so forth. Now, number one, Darwin never said anything of the sort. There's no writing. In fact, on the contrary, Darwin was very upset about these sort of ideas when they came out. No modern evolutionary biologist that I know of subscribes to social Darwinistic ideas. Not only that, but in fact, it's evolution. Ironically, it is evolutionary theory itself that explains why human beings are not these selfish bastards that social Darwinism would make us to be. After all, clearly we are social animals, and as social animals, we have to live in a group. And part of living in a group is that you have to show at least some degree of reciprocity, some degree of altruism, some degree of care for your kins, for example, and for people that are in your group. Otherwise, you're not going to survive as a social species. So in fact, it's evolutionary theory, the real evolutionary theory, the Darwinian theory, that predicts that social Darwinism cannot possibly happen in a human society because that would lead to the disintegration of a human society.
Excellent.
It's also that the quality that causes human beings to be social animals and to make certain concessions to the group, which is the basis for morality, as opposed to
correct
some supernatural origin. I mean, that answers the question: how can you be moral without God? Well,
right. There is a very nice book that came out pretty recently, actually about a year ago, by a primatologist, Franz de Waal. De Waal is somebody who studied for many years primate behavior, and in particular the bonobos, the pygmy chimpanzees, who have these very interesting societies where they essentially implemented the idea of make love and not war. Every time that bonobos have a conflict inside the group, they end up having sex, which seems to me like a good way to proceed, rather than clubbing each other on the head. Right. And de Waal spent a lot of time...
a lot of incentive to keep starting arguments, though.
That may be true. That is a good point.
The making up is,
That's a good point. De Waal has studied a lot of these behaviors over a period of years, and then last year he published an interesting book called Primates and Philosophers, where he and 4 or 5 prominent philosophers discussed the evolution of morality and the biological basis of moral behavior, moral thinking. And he makes to think, he and other people have done similar kind of research, make a good point that, yes, the building blocks of morality are very likely a result of evolution by natural selection. Now, that is not to say, let me hasten to say that this is not to say that every nuance of, of moral behavior in human beings can be directly explained by natural selection. That is not the case. Pretty much in the following way, let me make this analogy. I think it's pretty reasonable to think that human language evolved because it is in fact advantageous. It's adaptive. It's a matter of communicating effectively with members of your group. It's a matter of keeping up with gossips inside your group, who is doing what inside your group. But that doesn't mean that Shakespeare's plays are a direct result of natural selection.
Right.
Okay. Once you have that capacity in place, then there's a lot of other things you can do about it. Just like if you buy a laptop computer today, you might buy it for a particular reason, to play video games, and then all of a sudden you discover you can do all sorts of other things with it.
You can?
Yes. I'll tell you about it later. But that is the same idea about the evolution of morality. That is, the point is that natural selection probably helped put in place the basic building blocks of morality, largely 2 processes: kin selection and reciprocal altruism. Kin selection is the innate feeling that we have that we need to care for people with whom we're related genetically, particularly, of course, our offspring. And that's an innate thing. I mean, everybody does it. It just comes automatic. It's a biological urge. The other one is reciprocal altruism. Reciprocal altruism is the idea, which is found, by the way, in several other species, not only primates, is the idea that essentially, I scratch your back, you scratch my back. We live in a group, and it's advantageous for everybody if we are not too nasty, at least, or if we limit being, the nastiness to a certain point.
Well, yeah, and I understand. Yeah, and I was reading somewhere that apparently for instance, the tendency of females in many, if not most species, certainly in the mammals and other reptilians, the tendency of the female to care for the young is kind of natural selection.
It's a result of natural selection. I mean, after all, if you think about it, what is the major distinction between males and females across the board, almost across the board? There are actually a few exceptions. Across species, the difference is that the female invests a lot of energy into the offspring. Even if just at the level of eggs. Eggs are much more expensive than sperms.
Yeah.
And of course, if in the case of mammals that actually have gestation and so on, that is even more expensive at the level of metabolism. So once that the female has expended that much energy on the offspring, of course, she's going to also be into caring and making sure that the offspring is going to survive to the adult stage. For the male, on the other hand, unfortunately, it is very easy to get offspring. The sperms are not very costly, and so the males can afford not to stick around and so on and so forth. And this is exactly the pattern of behavior you find not only among primates but among almost every animal. Now, interestingly, one of the reasons we think that this is an accurate picture of what's going on is when you look at the exceptions. This is how science works. If you can explain, if the theory can explain also the exceptions, that is a very good sign. There are species where the paternal care, where there is paternal care for the offspring, not maternal care. So the mother leaves.
The seahorse?
Seahorses, for example. Yeah. And in fact, if you look at them, what do? They actually have special pouches that are used to care for the offspring. In that case, the reason the roles are reversed is because, in fact, it is the investment, the metabolic investment that these animals make that is reversed. There are a few cases where, in fact, males do invest more than females. And in those cases, as the theory of natural selection would predict, you do have that it is the male, not the female, who engages in offspring care.
Okay, so as an evolutionary biologist who's been involved in a lot of debates, and you're a professor, you have been